Today, I will speak of Rahulo Shankritayana. In modern Indian languages, it is normally pronounced as Rahul Shankritayana, a man who cannot be described in a single lecture, not even a series of lectures. He was a man from an UP village, a district Ajamgarh in Uttar Pradesh, in North India. Born in 1893, he studied in a primary school and thereafter he had absolutely no other academic training. But he had produced hundreds of books, edited a number of classical Sanskrit works on philosophy, and translated from several languages, including Chinese. This was all because there was a thirst in him, a thirst for knowledge, as also perhaps, I say perhaps because it can never be established what or which thirst was the more powerful, whether for knowledge or for religion. Born in a normal Hindu household, Vaishnava, he joined a monastery, mutt, and it is as a Vaishnava he started. But very soon there was a shift in his approach. He opted for Arya Samaj, which was first established by Swami Dayanand, who was a strong Vedist, at the same time very much opposed to traditional Hinduism. For example, he didn't believe in caste system. And in many other things, he was always a total reformer, seeking to go back to the sources, what every reformer does, to the origin. Now, Rahul Shankritayana became an Arya Samaji, a preacher, but thereafter the call of the Buddha came to him. He not only became a Buddhist, but also became a Buddhist monk, received his Upasampada and travelled all over the world as a Buddhist monk. His training was with some teachers in India, but also in Sri Lanka. As a missionary who was sent to England by our Maha Bodhi Society, he went to England and many other countries of Europe, and ultimately when he came back, his desire to fight against the British imperialism got the upper hand. He could no longer remain a Buddhist monk, but rather became a layman. He joined the very much of a militant movement by the peasants, both against the British Raj as also against the landlords. He went to jail, and in the second instance, in the late 1930s, after he had returned from Tibet, he edited the works of Dharmakirti, a prominent Buddhist philosopher, while he was in Hazaribagh jail in Bihar. Such a man with so many interests and a natural propensity towards speaking of languages is rarely met with. His basic contribution to Marxism was at first for popularizing, but also for combining many interests into one. His best popularizer known is Shamyavad Hi Kyon, What is Communism? That was published in 1934. That was a primer, but a primer that was full of surprises. Later he wrote a book called Vaijnanik Bhautikbad, that is scientific materialism. This was a primer that had been translated in most of the Indian languages, in Bengali, in Hindi, in Telugu, and most probably in other languages of the South. He was known first because of the easy elucidation, for the completely disarming style, and the sentences written with very well-known words that would communicate even to the people who had no scope for higher education, as it is called. A man who was one of the masses. One of his companions in Telugu lands in Andhra Pradesh tells an interesting story. On the way, he and Rahulji met a batch of gypsies. He talked to them, and say about 25 minutes after, he started speaking in the gypsy language, to the surprise of all. And this was not just a matter of indifference to others, that he could pick up languages as easily as a man picks up his mother tongue. A man who knew Russian, and when he was in Leningrad, even though he had no university degree, leave alone PhD, not even a school leaving certificate, he was appointed professor of Sanskrit and Buddhism. When Theodore Cherbatskoy, or rather Fyodor Cherbatskoy would be the Russian name. In English, he used to write as Theodor Cherbatsky. He appointed Rahulji, and Rahul not only produced the great works he had brought from Tibet, not in translation originally, first the basic text, the Eritio Princeps, as it is called. And when the thing was done, or was being done, Cherbatskoy wrote to an Indian scholar, "This is high time to call an international conference when the works of when the works called Pramano Bhartiko would be made public." The whole work was done meticulously, although as he used to write so many things at a time, and when he worked ceaselessly. He knew no fatigue. And that's why there are certain lapses here and there, and there are certain lacuna. Some lacunae which could be avoided if he had paid more time and attention to the works. But he left them to the editors of the journals where they were first published. He once told Professor R.S. Sharma, the famous historian, that in order to reach the people and at the same time to enrich the language, we must write in Hindi. And that's why he always opted to write in Hindi. In certain scholarly works, he of course wrote an introduction in Sanskrit, but almost all his works are in Hindi. And this was a way he thought that the language of his own could be enriched. Something that Rahulji did almost single-handedly. About a Scottish poet, Hugh MacDiarmid, it has been said, or rather he claimed, that I had created a whole of Scottish literature in the Scottish dialect, Lowlands. One man demurred and said, "You have written much, but you haven't created a whole literature." But Rahulji also could claim so, and with justice, because he has not only written essays or scholarly discourses, but also stories, a utopia called the 22nd Century, and even 2 plays in Bhojpuri. His stay in the Soviet Union was of course very fruitful. He had the occasion to meet so many Buddhist scholars there, but once he heard that India was on the eve of gaining freedom, he could not resist the desire to be on the Indian soil. So, bidding adieu to his family there, his wife and son, he started for India. Strangely enough, on the fateful day, 15th of August 1947, he was not in Delhi, not even in Bihar or UP, but in Orissa. He has his friends everywhere, people who admired and respected him, and that is where, in Cuttack, then the capital of the state Orissa, he witnessed a play and wrote appreciatively on it to his host, Justice Harihar Misra. From Orissa he came back to his own lands, that is Bihar and UP. Practically he preferred to stay in cold climate, so he shifted to Missouri and later on to Darjeeling, Kalimpong, and in these areas he used to stay, read and write. There was one breach with the Communist Party of India about the issue of national or official language. His personal view was not all quite agreeable to the Communist Party leaders then, and with the party having one view and he having another, they thought it proper that Rahulji would rather stay outside the party. Prior to this, he was not only in the party from the late 1930s, but also one of its major spokesmen in progressive literature circles as also in peasant movements. While he was in Missouri, he had also been active in trade union works. People who had met him always found it a person with so much of learning, carrying it so easily. When he had to speak with scholars from any part of India or Europe, he would prefer to speak in Sanskrit, but Sanskrit with very little compounds, very little difficult words, but always in the easiest way possible. His students too benefited both in learning the subject as also the language. And he could also speak in several languages. Once he was invited by the tea plantation workers, the leader was Chinmay Ghosh, to speak on Indian conditions and the new times that would be evolving. Manav Samaj, that was the title. And the plantation workers were surprised to find a person speaking in Nepalese, because there were so many Nepalese workers there and Hindi speaking workers could understand Nepalese fairly well. And when other languages failed, there was always Pali and Sanskrit. While he had been editing one of the canonical works, Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length discourses, he had also translated it at the same time, and his two translations of the long discourses, Digha Nikaya, along with Jagadish Kashyap, who edited the Tipitaka in Devanagari script, as also the Majjhima Nikaya all alone, and many other Buddhist canonical works. He had not only enriched the Hindi language, but also to those who know little Pali. These books are very much helpful in comprehending the theme of the discourses. One of his stories about learning Chinese is very interesting. He had gone to Ceylon, then called Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and there he met a scholar who used to learn Sanskrit from him. In return, he used to teach Chinese to Rahulji. And that is how, as was Rahul's habit, he started translating the Chinese version of a particular sutta, which was perhaps very dear to him, that is called the Mahapurinibbana Sutta. He translated the Chinese version into, no, not Hindi, but in Sanskrit, so that scholars all over the world could read it. The book is now rare, but it deserves reprint because of this special quality of being translated from Chinese into Sanskrit. When the Sanskrit versions are there, you can always compare and see how the same texts have been altered in the course of translation into other South Asian languages. Rahulji's parting of ways with the party, however, never meant that he lost touch with his doctrine. He was a peculiar person who always claimed that even though I have become a communist, I have not lost my respect for the Buddha, and I still claim to be his chela, his disciple. And this is where perhaps he differs from Ambedkar, Baba Saheb Ambedkar became a Buddhist. Nowadays they are called Neo-Buddhists. And by being so, he lost all touches with the other doctrines or philosophies or other political systems he had been in sympathy with. He became a Buddhist and a Buddhist. The same thing could be said of Dharmananda Kasambi, better known as the father of Damodar Dharmananda Kashambi, the Marxist historian, come mathematician, come so many things. But with Damodar Dharmananda Kashambi, he was a Marxist and a Marxist and a Marxist. His father, Dharmananda Kasambi, was very much a Gandhian. He died in the Jain way by adopting voluntary fasting, even though Gandhiji had refused permission. He became a Gandhian because of his belief in ahimsa, non-injury, and his philosophical views and his political views were all in one. Whereas with Buddha and Marx, there are certain philosophical affinities. The issue of dialectics itself, we may say, originated from Buddha in India as it had originated with Heraclitus in Greece. When we think of the history of global philosophy, taking the world as a whole, we have to think of these two persons as opposed to the idea of permanence and accepting transience as a part of our Welt anschauen, the world view. Buddha in India and Heraclitus in Greece had laid the foundation of dialectics in accepting change, permanently changing world, and that's how his doctrine that you can't bathe twice in the same river, and Buddha's view of discontinuous continuity, they too march. In 1955, when his youngest son was born, he decided to go back to the party. He went to the CPI headquarters and spoke to Ajay Ghosh, the then General Secretary of the party. Ghosh welcomed him with open arms, and that's how Rahulji became a member of the party again. But whether he was in the party or outside it, he always belonged to that party in the broad historical sense of the term, as Marx called it once. You know, after leaving the Communist League, Marx had never joined any other group or any other party throughout his life. What did Rahulji teach then to the Marxists? He taught to look back to the tradition of your own country, to understand what is living and what is dead. This is how Bhattacharya480P also worked in this field of philosophy, always thinking in terms of not only rejecting but also in accepting what can be salvaged from the past. With Rahulji again, it is futile to speak in terms of any definite pattern. He was a man who was a pattern in himself. A man who felt that in order to know about Buddhist philosophy, present books are not sufficient. You have to search for them. And in this search, he went to Tibet, not once, not twice, but 4 times. A journey to Tibet in those days was a very fearsome target. For European scholars like Giuseppe Tucci of Italy, they had some kind of support, some financial support as well as some kind of patronage. With Rahul, there was none. And yet, he managed to bring hundreds of manuscripts in palm leaf manuscripts and bringing them back to India on the back of mules. So, the tradition that Marx had inherited from his predecessors had also been true for Rahulji and Devi Prasad, and prior to him there was Bhupendranath Dutta. I can also speak of many other aspects, but as it stands, one should approach Rahulji directly to get into his works and understand by reading it how much Indian Marxists owe him.